You are listening to an episode of the Radiant Menopause podcast. Today, my very special guest is the wonderful Juliet Yelverton from the Healing Water Sanctuary in the magical Glastonbury. She really is a wise woman. We talk about the current crisis and how we can cope with it. We also talk about trauma and trauma healing, which features a large part of her work. It's a fascinating interview. She just has the most amazing soul and presence about her, and I know that you are absolutely going to love her. Please also make sure that you donate to her fundraiser, which we talk about in the show. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and this is the Radiant Menopause podcast. And today I have one of my very favourite ladies on the planet joining me from Glastonbury. Her name is Juliet Yelverton. You've heard me wax lyrical about all the things that she does, and I'm just delighted that she's spending some time with me today to share some of her wisdom. Good afternoon.
Oh, I'm really touched by that. That's an amazing introduction. Thank you, Jill.
So isn't it funny how, you know, we all know each other with this virtual world that we live in, and we follow each other, and we actually get to know each other really personally, don't we, through these mediums. But it's always really wonderful to connect in this sort of way, on the basis that at the moment, obviously, we can't connect in person quite so easily. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And yeah, connection is such a fundamental thing for human beings, to connect. And I don't think we realise with the lockdowns actually the damage that's done to humanity by keeping us all separate in our little boxes. I mean, that's just so taken for granted, our connection, that we don't even think about it, but it's fundamental to our feeling safe that we're actually in connection. So the more that we can do it, and it's just wonderful to spend some time with you here, Jill.
You know, that's what we're here to talk about, really, because your work with trauma healing is really of massive interest to me. We've already done a wonderful interview on the podcast with Dr. Marion Bennington. But before I kind of get into the trauma healing side of it, I wondered if you just tell us a little bit about your story and how Juliet got to get to where you are at the moment, you know, in Glastonbury, the Healing Gardens, the Healing Sanctuary. How did you get there? What is the backstory of all of that?
Well, it's a very, very long story. I'll see if I can put it in a nutshell.
That would be good.
Well, I guess as a post-war baby, immediate post-war baby, that born from parents who were 19 and 20-year-olds in a very poverty-stricken family, that I had a bit of a rocky start in life, and my parents split up just after I was born, and then I was a pass the parcel amongst many, many relatives throughout my life. I was put into a care home at the age of 14 because I was deemed to be in need of care and protection, because I was out and about places after 8 o'clock at night. Children who aren't protected, who come from broken homes, do get into very vulnerable situations. It was a remand centre, and I was even more vulnerable there than you can imagine. So that was a bit of a shake-up.
I didn't have you down as a naughty girl, Juliet.
I'm not at all naughty. I never did.
But they branded you that.
Absolutely, and unfortunately, many of the youngsters who are now in prison services they've been totally stigmatised because they happen to come from backgrounds where there was a huge amount of trauma.
Yeah,
and that's the tragedy of our age, really.
And it's difficult not to judge that. You know, we are very, very judgmental, aren't we? We always, make these assumptions that people that are, committing crimes or who have fallen foul to addictions or whatever, it's very easy to make those judgments. But actually looking underneath it, as Gabor Mate says, you will never find anybody with an addiction that doesn't have some sort of trauma in their life, as a child particularly.
Absolutely. And I was born from very, very traumatized parents. Gabor Mate also says that the children that were separated from their parents in the Second World War because they were sent to the country are more traumatized than those that stayed with their parents and witnessed the horrors of war.
Yeah.
And my mother was one of those that was separated from her parents. And she was massively dissociated, and bless her, she's an amazing woman, and still at 87, still very active
Your
now.
mum's still alive. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, she's a massive gardener. She's gardening from morning to night. She works really hard, but it's very hard for her to kind of connect emotionally. Yeah, I think that was the underpinning of the breakup in my parents' relationship, and that my father was one of 16, the youngest of 16 children in a mining family.
Yes.
Terrible poverty with 2 children being given away, 2 grandchildren being given away and never seen again, and awful things. But that's true of so many people. It's like if we start digging into what's behind the generational trauma behind any one of us, it's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. My father is one of 10. He was taken out of school at 13 to work in an iron foundry. My grandmother had, they weren't Catholics. They, she had endless pregnancies. They had a very, very poverty-stricken life, as did my mother, in her family as well. And they used to go to school on alternate days because they only had one pair of shoes.
Yes, exactly. And I remember when I was little, as my shoes became too tight, you just cut the end off of the shoe, just cut the top off so that you've got more space.
Yes, for your toes, yeah. And it's really not that long ago, is it?
No.
What we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's just 2 generations, just the generation back from myself. So I had that kind of start and changed schools about 20 times, moved around, and the main effect of that was attachment damage to me. That I didn't have a single person that I had a secure attachment with, neither did I have someone to attune to my needs. So that was a really shaky start for me in terms of being able to form relationships. So I then had 3 marriages, all of which broke up. And one of those marriages was somebody with severe alcohol problems. And then the following marriage was with somebody who had severe addiction problems.
We tend to gravitate to similar problems, don't we? Yesterday was the International Day for the movement of violence against women. And I've been working, doing some projects and some campaigns about that. And it's really difficult for people to understand why women stay in a relationship or how they go back and find other people that almost replicate the relationship that they've had. And it's that kind of thing that you're describing, even you, who presumably weren't enlightened at the time, but you've just described how that happens. You come out from somebody with one addiction to somebody else, who's got a similar dependency.
If you think about the attachment damage, how that sets you up, because the nature of attachment damage is that it's terrifying to be attached to anyone, but at the same time, it's agony not to be. Yeah. You need contact more than anything else. And when people are traumatized as young children, boundaries are damaged, so the sort of awareness of danger doesn't exist. For instance, you can't, the parts of the brain which is to do with how we relate, they literally don't grow when you don't have the proper attachment, because we learn to discriminate and we learn our relational skills through the input from the primary caregiver, usually the mother, and that the part of the brain that's all about relationship is developing as a result of the nervous system input from your primary caregiver. Since I didn't have that input, then the parts of my brain to do with relationship weren't sufficiently developed for me to be able to judge what was a safe relationship or not a safe relationship.
Yes.
So we're often very condescending, why does that person stay in that abusive relationship? But literally they don't have the capacity to do anything but be in that relationship.
Yes.
So,
and it seemed very common in the care homes that all these children, just sitting in cots after cot after cot. That's the kind of massive, obvious version of this when we see all these these little
Yeah.
waifs being, having any kind of physical contact withheld from them. But it doesn't even need to be as extreme as that, does it, Juliet?
Gabor Mate talks about this a lot, the damage, the developmental trauma as a result of stressed parenting. And that many people that think they've grown up into a really nice home, that our physical needs have been taken care of and so on, but their parents haven't been attending to the emotional needs, end up with attachment damage, which is what Gabor Mate states about himself, that he suffers from ADHD as a result of attachment damage because he was born when his mother was really distressed about the whole thing with the Holocaust. Father going off to concentration camp.
Yeah.
But many people are very highly stressed, particularly at this moment with this whole COVID stuff. It's like everybody is stressed. So which child at this moment in time is having their needs met?
Yes.
There's going to be massive repercussions for what's going on.
And this must be very difficult for you to watch. As a trauma expert, which you are, I know that just from a personal perspective and from the perspective of being a former nurse and from being a mum, that what I see going on, if we just ignore everything else, just to what's going on with our children and our teenagers at the moment, that it's just these massive flashing red lights. So for you, this must be really difficult, who understands the nuances of all the subtleties and not so subtle things that we're being subject to at the moment.
Yeah, I feel heartbroken. It's very hard for me to keep my spirits buoyant because I feel such pain, such emotional pain as I'm witnessing what's happening. Yeah.
And also as a therapist, it's really difficult, isn't it? Those of us that are kind of looking at this perhaps from a different perspective. It's difficult to keep our spirits up. We call it that we keep our vibration high because we know that we have to do this in order to help the situation. There's no point in us all jumping in a big black hole. That's definitely not going to help. But I do see that for the more sensitive souls, who are often the ones that are questioning more, is that those sensitive souls are the ones that are being subjected to being called out or losing credibility or losing their friends or whatever. And that goes from the average normal person to experts in their field who are presenting another view. And I can imagine that whether it's about COVID or whatever, if you are in this situation and you have had a trauma in your background or a certain amount of trauma in your background, like you, that this is, unless you've addressed this has got to be a big trigger for you, hasn't it? Or for anybody in this situation.
It is very challenging. I mean, there's lots of things about what's going on that's very challenging. And with regards to personal triggers, the whole issue about losing friends, for instance, losing connections, having the courage to stand up and speak, and knowing as a consequence you're going to lose quite close connections because people are becoming so polarized. It takes a lot of courage. And I think actually it's true for most people that whatever our damage, that we don't want to feel polarized and we don't want to find our friends turning against us. But it's happening to many, many people at this time. But yeah, for me, it is particularly painful when that happens.
So having had your 3 marriages and not chosen quite so well, you might say, although I know you do have children from at least one of those marriages, do you?
Well, I've got 4 children, but I actually gave birth to 6 children. And this is your question, why am I doing this trauma work? Well, my first 2 babies died after they were born. So I was 17 with the first one and 22 with my second one. I mean, all 6 were born 2 months early, apart from one which was 1 month early. So I had to go through this nightmarish experience with every one of my children, of them being in incubators, being in a life and death situation. As a result of the first child that I lost, I had to have a blood transfer and they mismatched my blood. So that all my subsequent children then were liable to a blood disease, and 2 of them almost died from the blood disease, which was a result of that initial blood transfer that I had. But my final, my youngest child, well, she's almost 30 now, that she had to have a total blood transfusion, and then almost a second, they were going to give her a second total blood transfusion. So she's this tiny, tiny little baby. All my babies are really small, like 2.5 pounds, and so vulnerable. And it was terrifying. I mean, she's still processing the trauma of that experience. It still comes up in dreams. And
it must be really difficult because you had no kind of point of reference really, because you didn't have that help and support. And I know what it's like, I had cesarean sections for all of mine, so my children were sort of taken away and I didn't see them for a few hours, and even that in itself is traumatic. But to have your background with your parents and then have to deal with that, each one of those, it's no wonder that this was difficult for you, because of the the backstory, if you like, and how you can't have had pins that on to anything that was familiar to you. Or I know how this feels because I felt that way myself, but actually that's probably not the case for you, is it?
No, it was tremendously difficult, and not having anyone to support me. So that's why my first marriage broke up, because I was in such a depression. I just had my third child, but the two previous had died. And I'd had no one to process or talk to about the deaths of my two previous children. Yeah. And then the third one was in an incubator for almost 2 months. And I was in such a depression. I was 23 years of age and had no one at all to relate to. And I was married to somebody also that didn't know how to deal. I mean, it was overwhelming for him as well. He was a young man. So yeah, there was no awareness, no help, and no family really to lean on. So
you said that the loss of your babies and the premature births of all your babies is one of the reasons that you started your trauma work. Is that where we were going at the
Well, no, yes, that's what that was the journey. Then following on from that, I moved to France with my third husband, and we were in a situation. We bought this house in this little hamlet. I've never really talked about this publicly, but we were under like a fascist attack for 8 years of living there with some really crazy neighbours that did everything in their power to turn the community against us, including the police who were fascist and the local mayor that was fascist. They did horrific things to us, continually physical attacks and abuse and all sorts of things, including at one point killing one of our goats and putting it into our water tank. We didn't know that it had happened, so we were drinking water that was poisoned with a dead goat. Yeah, I mean, that was pretty intense experience.
Gosh, it's been extraordinary, and so on what basis, and so unexpected. How on earth did you last for 8 years? Goodness me.
Well, I was very determined because I'd met this man who he's American, and he wanted to move to France, and so we bought the dream house, beautiful French Valley, absolutely exquisite house with beautiful land and things. And we're very poor but working really hard. Self-sufficiency. I was growing all our own food and had a herd of goats and had 3 of my children there. They were babies, and it was like the dream. We wanted it to work, but we didn't know that when we moved into this house that we were displacing somebody who was living there, that had forced the owner to let them live there rent-free, but they were very, very disturbed people. And they had to move out when we moved there, and then they moved to a house a few yards away, and then targeted us ever since.
Wow.
So that had really heavy repercussions on our relationship, and my partner was also, I think that triggered him to go back into an addiction pattern he had. And it was just so intense that in the end I left and came back to England. And I still had the house in France, but then it took me another, I don't know how many, 8 years or something to get my house back, by which time it had been burnt. At the end of it had been burnt down, and that there were 2 major fires, including my barn being completely gutted, which I'm still working to rebuild. So it's been like a horror show.
Yes, absolutely.
In the middle of that, I'd also had 3 car accidents, 3 quite bad car accidents. So yeah, it was all, so that's in a nutshell, all these different things And then at that early in the 90s, I'd done a craniosacral training and then started learning about Peter Levine and trauma and that, and I started studying pre and perinatal trauma, and that's how I got on the journey of the trauma work, really.
Yes. And look at you now. So that was in the 1990s. So when did you move to Glastonbury?
I first came to Glastonbury in 1984 because also I was the first person in our family that went to university. I mean, it was extraordinary that I even got there. Yeah, absolutely, given that I had no science background and virtually no schooling, but I did get into university to do a single honours degree in geology. When I finally got my degree in geology, no one would employ me because I was female. So I then went to India for exploration, and whilst in India I heard about the peace movement, and I thought I would come back to England and get engaged in the peace movement. At the same time I was breaking up from my husband, the second husband that was having alcohol problems, and I came back to England and went to Trafalgar Square, and there was a big CND rally, and I volunteered instantly to join the peace camps movement and got arrested the next day outside the American embassy in a protest against Reagan and the bomb, and so on, as one does.
That's one does, yes.
Got thrown into a police van and so on, and put in a cell for the night. And then I went off. When I was let out, I went to join the peace camp. Everybody's heard about Greenham Common, I suppose.
Yes. Well, yeah. Hopefully they have.
Yeah, so there were actually about 8 different peace camps around the country at that time, and this one was Molesworth, which was the second proposed cruise missile base. Yes. And so I went to live at Molesworth, and I was very involved there for quite a while. I'm very happy. And then I volunteered. We wanted to understand the links between militarization and poverty, war and poverty. And we formed a link with the Eritrean Relief Association and the Eritrean Liberation Front. And we ploughed up the land of the base. It was going to be developed for cruise missiles, but it was an ex-military base. We ploughed up a patch of land and planted wheat. It was called the Wheat to the Starving campaign. Well, the MOD came and arrested some of us and trashed out our field of wheat. But then we fundraised with CND and got a whole ship full of food and supplies that then went out to Eritrea. And I went out to monitor the supplies and to see that it got to the people it was intended for. And so I funded myself to fly out to Khartoum in Sudan, and then went to Port Sudan and met up with the Eritrean Liberation Front, who took me by Land Rover into Eritrea by night. And that's where there was a war going on there. So we could only travel at night. Everything was underground at that time. And then I got to meet all the refugees and prisoners of war, all the different sectors of society, and interview them. And when I came back, I had an exhibition about Eritrea, but then I worked with the Eritrean People's Liberation Front and the Relief Organization for a few years after that. So that was a massive insight into trauma as well, being in Eritrea.
Absolutely. So were you, when you were interviewing them, was that the kind of angle that you were looking at?
This is still like in 83, and I still didn't know really about trauma at that time, but it was very formative to me.
Yes.
Being because it was a terrible famine going on then. It was literally babies, skin and bone, and like the problems with how they could feed, because once the child is starving, it won't feed, it won't eat. And the distress of the parents, but also the incredible compassion of the people in Eritrea.
Yes.
I was in one refugee camp, and this woman came up, and we were giving out wheat, and she came, and she had to be translated because she was speaking Tigray, and she had to be translated from Tigray to Tigrinya to English. But her question is, who are you and what are you doing here? And I was trying to explain, I'd seen about the famine on television in England. I don't even know if she knew about television, because there was nothing, absolutely nothing, just animal skeletons lying in the sand that had died, and that's all there was. Everything was hidden underground. No infrastructure at all. as I started to try to explain that I was so distressed about what was happening to the Eritrean people, and I started to cry. And there's this woman with a baby that's dying from starvation, and she puts her arms around me and holds me,
Yeah.
and consoles me.
Mm.
And she said, God is with us, we will survive.
Wow, what a powerful moment.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that was really, really powerful. And it was so deeply touching to me. And it's like, and I was pregnant at that point in time, because I discovered like the week before I flew out to Eritrea that I was pregnant, and that was my 4th baby. And it was like, oh my God, I'm pregnant and I'm going out to a war zone.
What an amazing life. And I always think, so it's a bit like me, very, very small way. You know, I've got this podcast about the menopause, and I feel that I'm qualified to talk about it because I've had probably almost every menopause symptom going, and it feels like I've got the ability to talk about it. And it's a bit like you times 100. You know, that your ability to understand and to research and to help people with trauma must come, well, a good part of it, from your own experiences such as you've described. And I know that that's probably just you skirting over the main details of it.
Yeah, because when you go through an experience like you have with the menopause and all these symptoms, is that you develop an exquisite sensitivity and awareness of the subtlety of the experience. And when you can be really empathic with other people and listen, and you can bring your own experience, your own self into that relationship with the person, to, you know, with a deep understanding, with a deep presence in that moment, which in itself is profoundly healing.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so different to when I was nursing, you know, that allopathic world of almost kind of faceless, and particularly faceless at the moment. You know, if you go to your doctors, you've got to do it over Zoom at the moment. But the difference between complementary or alternate and allopathic treatment, or whatever you want to call it, is exactly that, such as you describe. It's what I would kind of label the healing hour, which is just that initial opportunity for two people to connect, so that you can actually see beyond the issue, beyond their problems, and beyond what you can give. It's actually that exchange of energy, isn't it? And I know that you believe wholeheartedly in that.
Yes, absolutely. It's like a problem is never purely physical, and unfortunately the allopathic approach that attempts to cut and burn, to dissect, to put in something to try and suppress a symptom, it so doesn't meet the full spectrum of what that issue is about. And fundamental is the human relationship, this ability to really hear and see and feel, to really feel what it is to be someone else. And when you are felt in that deep way, then immediately your nervous system starts to respond in a way that is life affirmative. Your nervous system is supporting your immune system, and you're on that healing journey. But if you're in a situation where you're facing a medical system that is in some way threatening, it's frightening, these processes, an operation is frightening, or some drug with side effects is frightening, that you're never going to engage the full healing potential of another human being with this kind of approach that doesn't fully understand what the immune system is.
I think you've described that very well, and particularly at the moment, with all the fear that most people are experiencing about what they're being told, it's very difficult, knowing that the very thing that we need at the moment is a strong immune system. The very thing that is being damaged by fear and by uncertainty and by confusion is our immune system. And so there's a complete example of, just as you describe, that if we can get back to, you know, and it's very difficult to step away from something that is so in our faces at the moment, isn't it? But I think this is very, very necessary, and the work that you do means that a lot of people have to have a certain amount of awareness of trauma to come to you. But actually, we see this every day, in that there will be people that are listening here that will have a conversation with somebody or go and see somebody, and they'll say, oh, I just feel better already. I just feel better already being in your company. And this is the kind of subtle version of what you just described, isn't it? Of that connection that we need as human beings in order to be able to heal whatever it is that needs to be healed.
Yes, absolutely. Just that power of presence, and whether somebody knows about trauma or not, it's just to be with somebody that's really going to be listening in a caring way, to be present. And what I teach my students is that you don't have to come in with some intervention to fix somebody when they've got a problem. All you have to do is to sit there and be curious and listen with presence and empathy to what someone's going through. And the person can heal themselves. We can't heal anybody.
No, I remember somebody challenged me 3 years ago, because my whole life has been about, well, much of my life since I trained as a nurse when I was in my mid-20s has been about healing and fixing. And then, you know, as a functional nutritionist and a Pilates teacher and lifestyle medicine advocate, you know, my whole identity was, I'm going to fix you. And then it's taken me a while. The first time I was challenged on this, actually, it's not your job to fix anybody. That's not what we're doing here. And it was a bit of a kind of, I have to think about this in a very, very different way. But I get it now. I really get it now. And I can see that, particularly in the work that people like you do, is that it's a way of people to connect with themselves and their own inner healing. You know, one of my big things is that we should stop treating symptoms, but instead we should build good health, because I've always believed that the body has the ability to heal itself. And getting out of its way is the major challenge, isn't it? And that's kind of a little bit what you do, because we live so much in the mind, you know. And I've said on this podcast before, you know, 2 years ago, I heard myself say to somebody, but my body's letting me down. You know, it's letting me down. Well, guess what? You know, I was getting what I was saying. And my body was letting me down. And until I understood and became more aware of all of that kind of trauma piece and all of the manifestation and awareness of how we live on a day-to-day basis, it was only then that I began to heal.
Yes, it's like the body, in its letting us down, it's given us some symptoms that we need to listen to. It's like we're letting the body down when we're not listening deeply.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're talking to women over 40 on this podcast. Maybe a lot of them are in the perimenopause, where they might be like me and having a whole myriad of symptoms. Maybe they've sailed through that part of the menopause, but are now dealing with the effects of the loss of estrogen postmenopausally, and all the things that we know, just from a physiological point of view. You know, if you're lacking in thyroxine, if you're lacking in insulin, if you're lacking in estrogen, there are certain things that happen to us that we're more at risk of. But what we also know is, from your kind of perspective, and I'm interested in this, is how necessary is it for us to identify, or to at least accept, that what has happened to us in the past may be having an influence on the way that we are experiencing our midlife at the moment?
I always take it, in trauma terms, I take it from the point of view of what is your nervous system doing in this moment in time. It's not about whether you've had a traumatic experience or not, because many of us have had things happen that we can't even identify as being traumatic. So it's not about going back and trying to identify, well, what are those things that could be leading to problems now. It's like, am I functional now? Do I have the capacity and the resilience to deal with all these challenges that are coming up? Do I get a postmenopausal symptom, for instance, or menopausal symptom that I can't handle? Am I overwhelmed? And if I'm being overwhelmed, what do I need to do so that I'm not overwhelmed, and that I've got some kind of resilience and flexibility to ride with whatever is coming up in this moment? Because trauma is the dysregulation of the nervous system. And when our nervous system is dysregulated and we are in fight or flight or parasympathetic shock. We're in this survival mode, as most of us are at this moment in time, and our body is flooded with cortisol, amongst other things, and our immune system is turned off, and our metabolism is not functioning properly. So when we can address these stress issues and we can bring our nervous system back into what we call the window of tolerance, where we have resilience and we can cope with stuff, then we have the optimum capacity to deal with whatever is coming our way. So this bringing our nervous system into this window of tolerance is all about taking care of ourselves. It's about giving ourselves the things that will help us feel better, help us to feel comfortable, help us to feel connected, help us to feel joy. And we've got this belief that it's selfish to take care of ourselves, particularly women. Yeah, this is such an upside down belief, because if we don't take care of ourselves, we suffer. And if we're suffering, our nervous system is not regulated. And if our nervous system is not regulated, our hormones aren't regulated. And our immune system isn't functioning. So we have to turn that up the other way, that we always have to put ourselves at the center. Women always have to put themselves first. They have to nourish themselves. They have to give themselves everything that will help them to feel joyful, to feel that connection with nature, to feel the connection with their loved ones. And that is more powerfully healing than any other thing that you can do.
Because we are the matriarchs, particularly in midlife. And I know, are you in your 60s, Juliet?
I'm 68.
Yes. So in our midlife, what I've become to realize myself, and also from interviewing wise, very wise women like you, is that there's never been a time when our kind of compassion and wisdom is needed more than ever. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is something else for women to reclaim, because there's been this incredible dismissing, one of women, a dismissal of women, but a dismissal of those who are older. Men and women are older. So we're massively missing the wisdom of our elders. And we need this wisdom.
Yes, but in some tribes and in some, in some cultures, the elder woman or man is revered, but not necessarily, or definitely not in ours. We see that all, every day, don't we?
Yes, and how foolish that is, that the elder ones aren't revered, because the elder ones do carry the wisdom. Mm-hmm. Unless you've had that length of time of living, that experience, how can you know? How can you really know? How can you really understand the full spectrum of what life is about, and what is helpful and what is not helpful? How can we create some kind of moral standards? We need tradition, we need morals, we need ethics, we need spiritual guidance. And we can't just cut that out. We can't just rely on a nanny state that's going to give us dictates about how to behave. I mean, it's ridiculous at the moment that people are being told what they should do to make sure that somebody else doesn't catch an illness from them. Mm. I mean, where's the wisdom in that? It's like adults are being treated as children, as little mm-hmm. children, by some unelected authority above them. Mm. There's no wisdom coming from anywhere at this point in time.
No, and I think that's where, a lot of the polarity is coming from, because if you are somebody that questions, and I question a lot, if I can see that something's logical, then okay, all right, yeah, I get that. But as soon as something becomes illogical, the little fighter in me, the little rebel in me goes, hang on a minute, because that's the warrior saying, I don't like what I'm seeing. And even if it's not affecting me personally at the moment, I can see that for future generations, it's going to affect their lives massively, whether they are attached to me or not. And I think that's where I'm seeing a lot of my friends, certainly, and I include you in that, is this gentle nurturing of this awakening process, which we really, really need to hold on to at the moment, and to help the process that we're going through at the moment, to recover and to come out the other side of this in a much more healthy way, you know, financially and spiritually and emotionally too. But it is going to prove quite difficult, isn't it?
It is. It's a terrifying time. It's an amazingly exciting time, and it's like we have actually got two timelines unfolding at this moment in time, and one is going towards some awful, unimaginable, soulless reality, and the other is going to a place where human beings regroup into tighter knit communities and self-nurturing, self-care, and honouring each other and reconnecting with the earth, and generating between themselves an economy which is really nourishing for the community.
And the great thing about that, Juliet, is that we have the ability to choose.
Absolutely. We all have.
I know it doesn't feel like that at the moment, but we actually do have the ability to choose.
We all have immortal souls, and we all have that wisdom, and why one person would choose and another doesn't choose, there's all sorts of possibilities at this moment in time, and one ultimately can't say, but we are all born equal in that we have the choice point.
Yeah.
And
so just to go back a little bit to some of the self-care that you talked about. So the Healing Water Sanctuary, I know that you deliver your own particular programs, but you also have in the sanctuary, when it's up and running properly, you also have a number of therapists. Can you just describe to us a little bit about how that works? And even if people can't get to Glastonbury, the sorts of things that you would recommend for women at the moment to be able to seek out to, you know, reduce these high amounts of stress?
Well, the most important thing about the sanctuary, I think, is that it's very peaceful and that we have incredible views out over the Somerset levels. So that I would advise people to find places where they can rest and relax and turn off their phones and get away from all the craziness, to give a time to allow themselves to settle and to be still. So that's the first thing, and to get lots of rest and sleep. So when you come to the sanctuary, you have that space to be able to book a room and to rest and relax and sleep, and to get off the conveyor belt. But we don't have any set things that you can just make your own food when you want to and get up when you want to, and it's kind of spacious in that way. And then we have different therapists that work, so we offer a range of therapies. So some are body work, massage, reflexology. We have somebody that specializes in health advice, healthcare, not health advice, but healthcare. And then we have the more energy approaches. We've got Reiki and body talk and kinesiology and shamanic healing, and I do trauma healing there.
Yes, so most of which I've experienced actually in one way or another, and it is really interesting. And at certain points of your life, you know, in the same way that your life is full of a journey of discovery in terms of people and relationships and jobs, actually what I've really enjoyed over the years is my discovery into alternate and complementary healing. I was one of the first people that went to a naturopath in Harley Street. I was singing at the time, and somebody said I should go to a naturopath. So, you know, this stuff has been around for a very long time, but has become more and more acceptable, and also more and more accessible as well, even if it's not down in Glastonbury. But the magical thing about Glastonbury, can you just explain to us a little bit about the energy that Glastonbury brings, and why there rather than in, you know, I don't know, Berkhamsted or, you know, I don't know, Tottenham?
Well, there's something mysterious about Glastonbury that's captured the imagination of humanity for thousands of years. And on the surface, it appears a totally normal little town, and yet Pilgrims have been coming here since ancient times,
Yes.
pre-Christ. And then there are all the legends of Joseph of Arimathea come in, and Jesus Christ come in here, and Joseph come in and bring in the cup from the chalice from the Last Supper. There's an enormous amount of legends associated with Glastonbury, including the Arthurian legends. Glastonbury attracts thousands of visitors every year. It's known as the heart chakra of the planet. And in addition to that, there are incredible nature reserves, wildlife sanctuary, wild bird sanctuaries around. So it's an amazing, beautiful part of the countryside, and it's a hub for alternative people.
What I love about it is that you've got to want to go there as well. It's not,
Yeah.
you know, it's not on a main line. You've got to really make an effort to get to Glastonbury, haven't you?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
There's something quite charming about that. So can you explain to us a little bit also, because I know that you've got a fundraiser going on at the moment in the Healing Gardens. Can you just explain to us a little bit about that?
Yes, so there's attached to the Healing Water Sanctuary, there is a 6-acre field where I've established community gardens, and we've been growing together vegetables and fruit, and we've got bees, wildlife areas, the Healing Water Spring. So that's been going for 10 years. So anybody can join the gardens. It's $250 a month to join, and then you come and you participate in growing. We have 3 huge circular beds, 3 huge circles, 13-meter circles, and each circle is divided into 12 beds. And we can grow an enormous amount of food. So we're growing for organic produce for the community and for the members. So when you join, you can garden and you get lots of produce yourself. This year we grew 100 pumpkins.
Wow.
Over 100 pumpkins. So we've grown an enormous amount of food. So should there be food shortages with all this nonsense that's going on, we're well supplied with all sorts of things. And the vision for some years have been to have a big polytunnel so that members can have something to do when it's cold, that if they can't get outside to garden, they can be in the polytunnel, sowing seeds for the spring. It's also a meeting place. So that's our fundraiser. We're trying to raise £3,500 to have this really lovely big polytunnel and to pay for it to be put up. And yeah, it's been a big dream.
It's a wonderful community project. So I'll make sure that I put the fundraising link onto in and around the show notes for this as well, so that if anybody would like to donate to that, I mean, it really is a wonderful cause, a community cause, as well as something important to my heart, which is, you know, the quality of food. You know, organic food is a functional nutritionist. It's really obvious to me that the more we can eat really nutritious food, the better chance the body has to heal itself. You know, this is the root for me. This is where everything starts, is, you know, it depends on what you're putting in your mouth. That makes a massive difference, despite anything else that you might do.
Absolutely, we are what we eat. And apart from the amazing food that we have down there, we have an incredible amount of wild food, all sorts of wild plants that I harvest and are dried to make medicinal teas, tinctures, vinegars, and for juicing. It's an amazing place. The principles are no harm to any creature. So I just allow things to grow, invite creatures in. We have a herd of deer, and we have all sorts of animals, wild animals and bees and butterflies and things. And this year, with the whole crisis that's been going on, a lot of people that have turned up in Glastonbury, that have been homeless, and needing some kind of focus, have come down to the gardens and been part of the gardens. So it's a wonderful centre for people just to come and be with nature. Even if they don't garden, that's fine. And sometimes they just come down to meditate, which is lovely.
Yes, that is lovely. And talking of meditation, you know, that's got to be one of the go-to things for reducing stress and reconnecting with oneself. And is that part of your personal trauma healing that you do?
Yes, very much so, because the breath is fundamental in managing levels of stress. So a long out breath lowers adrenaline immediately. So if you can bring your breathing, slow your breathing down without stressing yourself, bringing your breathing down to say 6 breaths a minute with a long out breath, then it's going to really help to calm anxiety. And in addition to that, the pathway to healing traumas through the body, through sensory awareness, through the vagus nerve. So by doing a kind of meditation where you're focusing on different parts of the body and having body awareness, then that also speaks directly to the primitive brain and turns off the activation in the primitive brain, which makes you feel stressed.
Mm. And so I know that you not only deliver trauma healing yourself, but you also have your students as well, don't you? Also run courses so that other people can benefit from this wonderful wisdom that you have.
Absolutely. So I do a 1-year training. The next one starts in February. And that training is for anyone that's working with any other people. And it gives them a total understanding of what trauma is about, the neurobiology of trauma, the different approaches to trauma healing. And as well as that actual educational aspect, we're working on that person's own trauma. Mm-hmm. Because we can only help somebody in as much as we've cleared our own traumatic imprints. So it teaches each person, it's like, what triggers me in a situation and how can I bring awareness to this so that when I'm working with someone else, I'm not activated by what's coming up for them, that I can hold myself in that situation and not start to dissociate or start to get angry or irritated with the person.
So this is quite a big space that you hold here, Juliet, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
And I really, admire you that particularly, you've that this year's course, I know, has gone on despite all of the things of the craziness that's going on around us. So I really respect you for that, because I know that you are, as we've said, a very, very sensitive soul, and that, things have not necessarily been any easier for you, even with awareness.
It's been very challenging. So we have that year 1 course, and then we have an advanced training course. And yes, we have been running that every week throughout the entire year, alongside the year 1 course that has also been much more difficult to run because of lockdowns and other things. And yes, it's been an incredibly challenging year I'm only able to be here in so much as there's cash flow coming through my business.
I've been asking a lot of women, all the women that I've been interviewing actually, it is the case for me that I really enjoy the company of women, and the most of my time, apart from working with women in sort of menopause sense, is that the connections that I have with women have become more and more important to me, and that the balance has changed, that, it's definitely women are my focus. From your perspective, from a very personal perspective, are you finding the same, or are you, is this even for you? How is this for you?
I've spent a lot of my life feeling very, very lonely and not really in connection with either men or women. Since I've been doing the healing work, I notice there are way more women that are involved in self-development and trainings. Every training that I've ever been on has been mainly women. And Healing Water seems to have mainly women coming to it. So that aside, I have some very, very good male helpers around me, males around me that are wonderfully supportive and kind. And I have an incredible group of women around me that I really, really, I'm really deeply touched. It's really been really healing for me this year to feel the support around me. Yeah.
Often takes the trauma, doesn't it, for people's true colours to come out, and really focusing on what's really, really important.
Yeah, and I think it's so important for whether we're men or women that we're underneath that we're all human, and we all have the same human needs, that we can all support each other, that if we can just be there and be compassionate to the difficulties, whatever our sex. I mean, each males and females have their own particular trauma patterns, and the the burdens that have been put on both of us, that leaves us feeling less than, other than, bad in some way, inadequate in some way. And if we can have compassion for both our male and our female friends for what we've had to deal with.
And I think you're right. You know, what is obvious is that although this might be a happy state for us as midlife women to have more connection, particularly with women. Actually, I think one of the big worries at the moment is that because we're better at reaching out, we're better at picking up the phone to girlfriends and planning a Zoom knitting session or whatever it might be, is actually, I think in this situation, it is the men that I worry about the more, because the things that the places that they go to and the ways that they connect are no longer available to them. So actually, this, not only our children, but our men really have been suffering, I think, and probably suffering in silence.
Absolutely. I think it's been devastating for many. It's devastating for them. Yeah.
Okay, and finally, what are you looking forward to?
Well, I was looking forward to this call with you. And now the sun is still shining. I'm looking forward to going out onto the Somerset levels and see if I can see the starlings doing a murmuration. So that's my, yeah.
And long term, getting the polytunnel up, presumably.
Yes, I don't really know what to look forward to in the future. I look forward to the possibility that humanity can be happy and we can create heaven on earth.
Yes, that's a wonderful answer. But being in the now, I mean, it's really obvious to me, Juliet, that you do live in the now. And I think that's a real skill that I know that you've developed, actually, because it's not something that comes easily. And, what we do know is that our worries and our fears are often based on our past, because that's all we can base our future on. But, working with you in your trauma healing and your wisdom and power and your insights, you've just described really, really well how, the next thing to look forward to is the thing that you do after you hang up this call. And I think that's a wonderful message to give to everybody is, stop worrying, stop watching the news, stop worrying about the big things, and concentrate on the things that you can control.
Yeah, absolutely. Turn the news off, because it's just doing your heads in. It does my head in. Turn it off.
Yeah.
Okay, we can't know what's happening. There are all sorts of things at work beneath the surface, all sorts of amazing things happening, and that what we worry about usually turns out to be unfounded anyway. So just to take small steps, one small step at a time.
Yes. See, I told you, everybody, I would bring the wise woman to speak to you, and there we are, those wise words right there. Thank you, Juliet. I'm very, very grateful for you spending your time with me this afternoon, and I will make sure that we try and get some money raised for your polytunnel.
Bless you. It's been a wonderful experience to share with you this afternoon. Really lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah.